Hello and welcome to day 4/part 4 of 28 Days to Better Chess Tactics. Today we're going to go through the second part of forks, pretty much all the forks or double attacks as you call them that do not involve knight forks. So in this position, which is white to move, I'll give you a second if you want to try to analyze it for yourself. Okay, so in this position we can see that it's simplified with basically bishops of light squares, same color, and queens with masses of pawns that are relatively equal. Of course, white has this majority on the queen side, but you can see that since it's white to move, we want to look for all the forcing moves. Now, it looks like we have a double attack with the queen here, hitting the bishop as well as this pawn, but we have to look for the defenses that black has, and of course he can just bring the bishop back, protecting his bishop as well as the pawn. So we want to look for all the checks, captures, and threats. So we can see that if we take with the bishop, it's both a check and a capture, and if the king recaptures, then we have a check on the king and hitting the bishop as well. Now the bishop can come here, but of course it's not protected, we would just take it. So if the king moves, we just win the bishop. Now you'd be surprised how often tactics like these occur in games between very strong players. And a lot of games that I've played against masters, they've won not necessarily because they outplayed me strategically or tactically, but just because I missed some simple tactic, or even they missed some simple tactic in the end. So these tactics occur far more often than you think in practical games, and you'll notice that the very strongest players, these kind of tactics, these simple combinations, are completely natural and they almost never ever miss them. So part of becoming a stronger player, which you'd be surprised how far you can get, is just simply recognizing basic 1 to 3 move combinations that win a pawn here or even a piece. But frequently you'll see these tactics that win a pawn, such as bishop takes, and you have a double attack. And that's the whole essence of tactics, really, is a double attack, which is making 2 threats that the opponent can't meet at the same time. Alright, so we'll move on to position 1, and we'll go through 5 positions of other types of forks. Welcome to position 1. In position 1, it is white to move, and you can see that black is basically trying to infiltrate into white's camp, but white has the same opportunity as well. And so in this position, you'll want to find all the candidates, but I would encourage you to start to train your comprehensive, complete thought process. Now, I covered this in my strategy course, which is a 4-part thought process that I encourage you to use to find the best move during the game. So far I've basically covered finding checks, captures, and threats, but the 4-part thought process basically covers finding all the opponent's threats first, then finding your aggressive opportunities, and then doing a blunder check. Now eventually your training of tactical positions will not just be working on a motif, but will be working on your overall thought process so that it doesn't matter which position you're analyzing, you'll use the same thought process to find the best move, and it'll be comprehensive so you don't miss anything. Alright, so I'll give you a second here to solve it yourself, and then we'll go through it. Okay, so in this position, if we wanted to follow a comprehensive thought process, we'd want to look for all the threats from black. Now, there's really no concrete threats. It looks like black has a check here. We could just simply move the king in. he could take this pawn after the king moves, but there's really nothing concrete that we need to worry about. All right, so on to our moves. We want to find all the aggressive replies. So it looks like the king doesn't really have any concrete threats. The queen, we have a check here, and the rook has a check here as well. So pretty much, and for the pawns there's nothing, so pretty much we have two moves, and we'll go with the queen first. So if we investigate the queen move, we see it's a check, and that there's only two replies. Either the knight moves back, or the king moves here or here. So in either of those cases, we have to notice that the rook here is hanging. So if the queen moves, it's not only checking the king, but it's also hitting this rook that's not protected. So that wins a rook. So we'll remember that evaluation, that it's winning a rook, and we'll just quickly look at the rook move. We can see it doesn't really lead to anything, so we would simply play the queen move. But before we'd play it, we want to do a blunder check, which is visualizing the move that we make and making sure, visualizing the forcing replies that the opponent has, which we can see that there really is none. So we just simply play it at that point and win the rook. All right, moving on to position 2. In position 2 here, it is white to move, and I'll give you a second here to pause the video and go through your thought process. Okay, so in this position, you can see that, well, first off, the black bishop's sitting here, but if you went through the 4-part thought process, you would look for all of black's threats. And so black doesn't really have any concrete threats, any checks, captures, or attacking moves, so we can pretty quickly move on to our own move. So you could see if we start from the king, there's really no candidate moves. The queen, there's really no checks, captures, or threats. The rooks are pretty passive. The bishop can take here, but that obviously doesn't lead to anything. And so pretty much all we have is pawn moves and this knight move here. So with the knight move, he can simply bring the bishop back, we'd win a pawn, or he can, better yet, protect it with the rook. So he definitely has a defense, and we can evaluate that as being relatively equal. With the pawn, we do have an attacking move in f4, and so we should evaluate the concrete line until the end. So we could see that if we move the pawn up to f4, the only move for the bishop is back, which allows us a fork in e5. So, of course, we need to look at the line until the end. So there's pretty much two moves here. Well, of course, there's three, because the queen could come up and just allow white to take, and then he takes his pawn back. But pretty much either the bishop moves and we take the knight, or if the knight moves, we need to evaluate and see what he's threatening in this line. And we could see that, for example, if we took the bishop, black is threatening a knight fork here. So this is why it's important to look all the way until the end of the line. So if the knight moved here, we'd need to take it before we take the bishop. And so all the way to the end of the forcing line, we can see that we are a piece up, and we can correctly evaluate that f4 is the best move from the initial position. Alright, moving on to position 3. Alright, in position 3, I'll give you a second here. It's white to move, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so in this position, we can see that, first off, notice that black's pieces are quite discoordinated. He has almost all his pieces on the 7th or the 8th rank. His rooks are disconnected because of this knight. So your intuition should be telling you that there has to be some forcing continuation that gives you an advantage, a material advantage. So with our king, there's nothing. With the rooks, we see that well, this rook is hitting the weak e6 pawn, but it's protected by the knight, so that doesn't work yet. We see that this move, rook to c1, is threatening a double attack here, so that should definitely be investigated. That's a candidate move, rook to c1. So as for the bishop, we see that we can take this pawn here. We'll have to investigate that. And for the knight, we can move the knight forward. But of course, if the knight can just take, and that'll be a trade. All right, so definitely rook to c1 is a good move. And we could see that there's really no way for black to defend against white coming into the 7th rank. So unless we find something more forcing, we'll just play rook to c1. So we'll investigate bishop takes d5. So if the bishop takes, we see that as of this moment in the position, the bishop is pinning the knight to the rook. So either the pawn has to take the bishop, or the rook has to protect the knight, at which point we'll win another pawn. So if black takes, that allows us to check on the 7th, and because this knight on b7 is undefended, we have a double attack on the king and the knight, winning the knight. So we win our material back, plus a pawn, as well as more active pieces. So we can evaluate that either rook to c1 or bishop takes d5 are good. But of course, we'll play the more forcing continuation because it forces our opponent to do something concrete. We can more easily evaluate it, and it actually gives us a bigger advantage. All right, moving on to position 4. All right, in position 4 here, I chose kind of a realistic game situation where at the end of the line, it's white to move, by the way. At the end of the line, you will not necessarily have an overwhelming advantage that allows you to win, but you'll notice that since you're a piece down, you have to find a way to make the position equal again, or to gain some kind of material advantage temporarily. All right, so I'll give you a second. It's white to move. So in this position, you could see that it's actually quite simple because there's really only one candidate move. There's really no pawn moves that threaten anything. The queen, well, the queen can come here, but that doesn't really threaten anything other than this pawn, which can be easily defended. And the only candidate move really is bishop takes e5. When you follow the thought process of looking for forcing moves, it'll actually cut down your work a great deal because you'll be able to very quickly find all the candidate moves in a position, which will allow you to find attacking moves that give you an advantage. So if we investigate this line, bishop takes e5, knight takes, we can see that we can bring a double attack against black's king and black's queen. Now, it looks as though if the queen takes, that the rook and the knight will be hit, but black has a resource where he can bring his knight back, which interposes as well as protects the rook. So at the end of this line, it doesn't necessarily lead to a totally winning position, and even black may have an advantage, but at least white has a fighting chance, and he could try to pick up some more pawns or maybe even a piece. So these kind of tactics occur frequently in games where you won't necessarily find kind of a tactical position ending where everything is just so winning for the other side. But you can see here that it allowed you to use your tactical skills to make the game a little more equal. All right, moving on to the last position. Okay, so in position 5, the last position here, I would just remind you before you solve it that you try to go through the 4-step thought process. So first, look for all of black's threats, see what he's threatening to do, and then look for all your forcing checks, captures, and threats for each piece. And then once you've calculated to the end of the forcing line, you evaluate the position, choose the best move, and then you do a blunder check. So before you'd play your move, you visualize the move you'd play and then see what forcing replies the opponent has. All right, so it's white to move. I'll give you a second. All right, so in this position, we can see that first off, black is threatening this pawn. So if we don't do something, his next move will be to simply take b2, which would give him an advantage. So we want to prevent that. And now if we look for our own forcing replies, we could see that there's no candidate move for the king. For the queen, there's really no forcing reply. We can increase the activity of the queen, bring the queen forward. For the knight, there's really nothing forcing, nor for the pawn, so we're left with the rook. Now, with the rook, we could see that we can take the bishop with check, and this is why you should always look to the end of the forcing line. So if we see that we take the rook, the king is now in a position where if we bring the queen forward, we have a double attack, because this rook is sitting undefended. And that's another point to make. You can look for tactics when you notice undefended pieces in your opponent's camp. So, especially heavy pieces such as rooks. So after we take there, we bring the queen in, and now we're checking the king, and we're attacking the rook. And because black has to move his king, we win the rook. So we're up a piece. Of course, he can take this pawn, but we'll just simply defend the other pawn and be up a piece. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. This has been day 4, or part 4 of 28 Days to Better Chess Tactics. I'd like it if you could just leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this series. Let me know if the time is too long or if you think it's perfect. Let me know if the positions are too simple or too complicated. I'm trying to strike a balance. Of course, you know, some players are going to be advanced, some players are going to be beginners. So this is more for beginner side, but of course I think that every player of every level should study these positions again and again, because this is the basics of your chess tactics mastery. Just let me know what you think, and nice to have some feedback. So I'll see you in day 5.